So let's get going. And we're going to talk about 3/4 back head views. So contours, whoops, and overlaps. And now as we start moving that head that's in a profile now towards a back view, and we'll, like I said, we'll look at a front view very briefly, we're going to add to that proportions. So to start off, the reason we're starting here is to talk about the importance of the ear. I've talked about that before when we've drawn full heads and ear constructions and things. We've done that a little bit. Let's pretend we can see his neck there. And what we'll find just in general, very roughly, without the features, we'll add on those features. Those are going to bump out one way or another. Let's do a little bit in here. So here, without those features, if we go from the back of the head without the hair, and it varies a little bit from person to person, and there's actually 3 different skull types. So it varies from skull type to skull type. If we more or less cut that in half, from the back of the head to the center of the head, and out to the, basically where the forehead meets lips, the barrel of the mouth, meet the chin. We use that as a center line. These are pretty equal. That's going to be very roughly, but plenty good enough for generic construction to place the ear. And then give or take, again, the character, but just generically, we get close, not exactly, but close, if we make a decent sized ear, to stacking an ear on top to get more or less to the top of the skull and more or less to the bottom of the chin. So the ear is in the middle, top to bottom, and the front of the ear, although it usually lays back, oftentimes lays back. Oops, don't want that. It's going to be right in the middle again, front of the ear. So the ear is in a unique position to help us. And notice that it's the, oops, there we go. It's the, make this very crude. It's the only features that are on the side of the head. I'll show you how to draw this good ahead some other day. So the ear is in a unique position to show us the position of the head. So where we place that ear is going to give us a ton of information about how that head is facing in space. And so the ear is going to be overlapping the face and skull to some degree or another. And then we'll come in and talk about contour of the whole skull or of the whole hairstyle, because we can't see the features, contours of the features, because that's going to be into a 3/4 back view. But if we look at a 3/4 front view, we'll notice how the proportions are changing here. Now the ear gets very close. How are we doing on no complaints? I think we're doing well. Notice how in a 3/4 front view, the ear gets pretty much to the back of the skull. And in a 3/4 back view, the ear gets pretty much, let me make that bigger for you, pretty much to the front of the face. So look at how closely that ear crowds the face as we get behind, and how, let me blow that up for you in case you're on a smartphone, how closely the ear gets to the back of the skull, and maybe even overlaps that back of the skull a little bit in that view. So the placement of the ear is critical for that facing dimension. As that ear moves closer to the back, we're moving closer to the front of the face. And then as that ear moves closer to the front of the face, we're going to get closer to the back of the head view. So that's proportions and overlaps. We're going to have the ear overlapping the head or skull, the face or skull, and the proportion will crowd off that center pole, that center axis. Let's make this more vertical, just because. It's going to put us in a great position very quickly to understand the position of the head. And let's make this a rounded, not a boxy. We'll use the box in a minute here. A rounder head, just with a round skull, placement of the ear correctly. Then we'll want to add, almost certainly, the position of the neck correctly. Should be another time, another lesson. Make a little more heroic figure here. We're going to get a great understanding of the position as it turns one way or the other. And if we have time, this might be next week, it'll also help us tilt back in space when we're underneath the head or on top of the head. And so on. And so we can then, with some practice, and it takes practice, get the leaning and tilting dimensions. And in this world, there's 3 dimensions. In quantum mechanics and sci-fi movies, there's multiple dimensions. The 3 dimensions, for we artists, we've got it super easy, is just 3 positions. And that's in no particular order. Leaning, and we can close one eye and figure out how it's tilting by tilting our pencil there. It can still fool us, but we can get that. Facing, we just dealt with that with the ear. And then the last one would be tilting, breaking the picture plane. That's oftentimes the hardest because we're working on a flat canvas or a flat piece of paper and showing the illusion when the reality is very different is a problem. No problem getting the facing dimension in theory, leaning dimension, but actually breaking the picture plane and give the illusion of depth or a strong idea depth is oftentimes the hardest. Not for everybody, but oftentimes is. So now I can combine, and I'll do these things in stages. I'll work on the facing dimension as we just did, getting that ear closer. And notice when we start playing with those positions, overlaps are going to come into this quite strongly. As we just noticed that the ear, we can give a little thickness since we're behind the ear a little bit, like it's a, a little disc. And we could cut off a chunk of the disc to get a little architectural thing there. But notice the overlaps, not just the ear on the head, but the eye socket in front of the eye, and the eye socket and the nose, the eye socket and the cheeks in front of the nose, and mouth and the chin also. So we're getting these overlaps that are important. That's going to show depth. It's the simplest idea for creating depth. Again, none of these things are easy. Getting that to feel right, in the right overlaps, in the right position, in the right shape, in the right design, and all that kind of stuff can be really difficult. So we've got to practice until we get control of that. And then I'll practice just tilting. I'm sorry, just leaning. So maybe I'll just cut this right in half, put the ear into a pretty good profile. And we'll still have some overlaps as we found last time. The jaw overlaps the neck, and the cable muscle overlaps the throat, and the shoulder might overlap the head and neck assembly, and so on. So those overlaps do a lot of good work. But I'll play with these independently. It's called chunking down. Take a complicated problem that has two and oftentimes a lot more steps and break it into simpler steps. Just facing with the ear, just leaning with the design of the head. Instead of this, I'm going to face that front down. And maybe I'll do it without the ear at first, and then I'll add the ear, and then I'll make a more refined shape of the skull, and so on. Chunk it down. And then you can build those together. And with some practice, you can also take something that's close to a profile, and just by moving that ear, there's a little more to that. Notice the jaw goes in front of the ear. Otherwise, when you talk, your ears would wiggle. So we're changing the proportions of things, position of things, the overlap of things. But now we can get that worked out with a suggestion of the overlap and a correction of the proportions, closer now to the front than to the back. Maybe here's the skull. It's 3 plus. Here it's not quite 2 or whatever. We do it on time, pretty good. Now, if we can't see the ears, that's a problem. So we've got a couple choices here. We could depend on symmetry, where let's pretend we're right. Let's do this first. or right in a perfect back view, even though we're getting a 3/4 torso. So I can depend on symmetry. This side of the skull is very much the same as that side of the skull. And oftentimes you can see a little bit of the ears. And those will be symmetrical as well. We'll see the ears separating, the rim, outer rim of the ear, separating just a little bit from the skull, and equally on both sides of the skull. So we depend on the symmetry there. So now we're adding symmetry to overlaps and contours. We haven't gotten to contour yet, and proportions. And then if we create a little asymmetry, barely see the ear on this side and see the ear overlapping on this side, then we start again to understand the situation, symmetry and asymmetry. But we can also use contour, and we can use the skull and the face, or the skull and the neck, or the skull and the face and the neck. And notice you have a skull that's going back and oftentimes a little up, and a face that's going down. And then the ear sits in between those things. And so we have a downward direction for the mask of the face, and we have a backward direction and maybe slightly up for the top of the skull. And so even if it's quite rounded in character, we're going to have a rounded corner. So I'll just leave the rounded part out and make it a corner. That's one of the reasons I do this. And then I'll just make a sailboat, or I'll chisel around the back of the head off. And then I might actually draw through that. But I want that corner, even if I end up rounding it off, buffing it down like a carpenter by the end of the rendering drawing process. So contour, and specifically contour with an eye towards corners, become really useful. So notice what happens if I take something that's rather rounded and think of it for a little while as something very squared. And usually what I'll do is I'll use a strategy of putting curves between the corners. If it's really short, I might not bother with the curve. But the longer it is, the more I'll bring in the curves, because that's more organic. It's less mechanical. And those and measure proportions. How long is the skull going back compared to the face going down? This is a little more, this is a little less maybe. So on. So now look what happens. If I take any kind of egg rounded idea and just make it a little squarer with curves and corners, I can start to get a lot of structural leaning and facing info. And if I can see a little bit of an ear in there, oops, that's great, because that'll tell me it's facing that way a little bit. But now look at what I did. Let's go back to the curves and corners. What I'm really thinking of one way or another is a box. And it might be a three-dimensional box that includes the tilt now, or it might be a two-dimensional box. But as soon as I separate the top or bottom from the sides and the top or bottom from the front, now I'm getting a little bit of a tilt. So if I give a little corner to the forehead, a little corner to the brow and socket area, a little corner to the chin area and jaw area, notice now I've got what I call box logic. And then we can think of the front as a corner against the side. Even if we're going to end up rendering that into very rounded forms, we'll just act like a wood carver. And I'd say it's a skill. Here's the bottom plane. Here's the bottom plane. And so on. So I make things look boxy, but the more curves I put between the corners, the easier it is to round off in the rendering stage. But I'm still getting that perspective of everything on the front plane is going down and away from us as it gets farther from us. Everything on the side plane is fairly flat towards us. So notice what I did here. There was the hairline. Here is the bangs. Here is now, I'm going to chisel out like a wood carver would, get my chisel out and take a little chunk out of there where the bangs are parted side to side. But this is in line with that. Just like this. I'm going to screw it up for a second. Is in line with that. And if these aren't in parallel, with a little practice, we'll quickly know it. And if you know linear perspective, you know these shouldn't be in perfect parallel. They should be vanishing towards some vanishing point in the horizon. We don't care about that because we're going to round it off. So we can just make them perfectly parallel. Perfectly parallel. And now, if I can get an interior corner somehow, now that's what creates structure, three-dimensional, is not going just around the form, but showing how the audience can cut across the form, either in line or in tone. So let's push this. Super dark. We'll leave our little purple construction line that breaks the contour. And if even without that, with the placement of the ear and the placement of the neck, we get the fact pretty clearly that we're on top and in a 3/4 behind view, or a little more than 3/4, almost perfect back view, doing that. So I'm going to find some detail. I'll do a construction line, or I'll do a rendering. So I might take the highlights. Oops. Give me a second to fumble here. So I might just put the highlight across that corner. And I can make it rounder or squarer, but it's showing that same perspective. Getting a little top of the head there, and a little bit of the side of the head, and a lot of the back of the head. And this will come right down to our hairline. And it's organic, so if we miss a little bit, nobody's going to care. They'll buy into it. If it really bugs us, we'll correct it and move it over there to make it more box-like. How are we doing on time here? About out of time, but let's continue. So now I'm adding contour, and I'm focusing on the corners. And I'm doing, you can call it whatever you want, I'm doing what I call box logic. I'm thinking of the contour and the shape design, or the structural, architectural design, three-dimensional design, form design, whatever you want to call it. I think of it more like a box. So the contours are going to have real strong corners. And if I want it to be organic, as we oftentimes do on a human form or any organic thing in nature, most organic things in nature, most certainly living things, there's a lot of fluidity to that because there's a lot of water. So, and then we can refine these things. So I can chisel corners. I can vary it based on the characteristics or the asymmetry. I can loosen it up and add some flyaways to make sure they realize it's hair. And then fairly quickly, we're getting the idea across. See what else we have here. So there again, we have a 3/4 back view, but more back view than 3/4. But without the being on top of it, now we're a little bit underneath it. So it's a little asymmetrical. We could solve that by overlapping the ear here in different ways. But now I want this thing to be a little, what we want is to show the back against the side. But I want to have a sense of whether I'm on top, like we were last time, or we're on the bottom. And if I think of my box logic, I'm just going to draw this contour, and the slope coming down to where the bangs are there again, this kind of side sweeping bangs. I'm just going to go down, and I'm going to try and get behind. And then I can chisel it out. But oftentimes that will muck up my proportions. So what I might want to do is draw something that's simpler, like a generic egg, just to get something down. in roughly the right proportion, roughly the right position, and then come on that. And if I want to kill two birds with one stone, then I want all these lines to be curved. And I can just kind of chisel this stuff out. And now we're getting a little bit of overlap. Of course, hair over the skull, ear and hair over the face, and neck. And I can feel my own neck to get a sense of that. Neck in front all of the face as well, not all of it, the face. Like so. And then I can play with the design of this, and I can play with where the corner goes, and maybe, depending on the hairstyle and such, build a little asymmetry into that. Not for perspective's sake, but maybe just because that's the character of that hairstyle. And any of these things I could make rounder versions and get the same effect. So more of a pickle barrel, or a tube, or a tapering tube, or an egg that's more of a capsule. So I can kind of mix together what's round and what's square. Maybe I'll curve the bottom of that hairline like it's a cylinder, but I'll chisel the top, and so on. So practice that. Overlaps, contours, proportions, symmetry and asymmetry, corners and curves. It's a lot of ideas. Each one's simple, and take each one in its own time and practice that. So I might just practice corners and curves and not try and draw anything in particular. Just trying to get the idea of creating corners and curves. And then I might start trying to get the symmetry. So that these are parallel, to have a little bit more box logic. If it's short, it can be curved, but shorter it is, the less we can show the curvature. Longer a curve extends, the more curved it becomes. So take your pick. Doesn't have to be perfect, but we want these fairly parallel. Unless it's some kind of tapering idea. And now we can work those things out. And I like to just draw it again rather than erasing. So I'll just do it. So I'll try and get these aligned. And then I'll focus on these and do it again, making sure these are aligned more or less. And now I'll align these. And I'll do it again. And try and get the taper. And then I'll do it again and try and get the tilt. And then I'll do it again and try and get the facing. And I'll take it one small problem at a time, and then I'll solve that to, not till it's perfect, but till it's better. And then I'll take another problem, small problem, and then work on it again, and so on. And that's the way I can improve, and I can see measurable results right away. Well, I didn't even notice that this missed completely here. I didn't notice that these were flailing off in different directions here. I didn't notice that there was a taper here where it had to get smaller and then larger. And then I'll work 2 or 3, 8 or 10 drawings, and they're only going to take me a few minutes to work out a better solution and learn to see the subtle difference between something that is kind of in the ballpark and something that's is wonderfully correct. So anyway, let's stop there. Hope that helped. Add the ED on the end of that. And thanks for hanging out with me, guys.